This week, we see a lot of action in the astrology. We see a lot of planetary ingresses and a lot of planetary action is just the easiest way to say it. I think this is a very exciting week and a lot is going to change, so let's go ahead and talk about it. We're starting Monday off with the moon ingressing into Virgo and making an opposition to Saturn. We're also going to be having Venus make a trine to Pluto and Mercury making a trine to Neptune as our two highlights for Monday. The moon going into Virgo, something I really like about, and again, you guys are probably going to be able to guess what I'm going to say about the moon going into Virgo, cleaning, getting things organized, but I really love the combination of Scorpio and Virgo. Like Scorpio is again like really getting underneath the surface of things, going into not necessarily the details, but like if the moon in Virgo is like cleaning and organizing, Scorpio is like that one corner that you typically ignore or that you don't clean, or that one area that you usually just kind of like leave. Like it's like, oh, it's too, it's like cleaning underneath your refrigerator. Like it's something that is in the darkness, that's hidden away, that you don't necessarily clean typically, but this is kind of like a deep scrub. What I think is important is that this is a waning moon. Something I'm going to talk a lot about next week is the Mars Cazimi. And I think these next 2 weeks are extremely powerful. And I know those are so typical like buzzwords for astrology, but it's one of those things where there are certain, astrological transits that can be very powerful depending on how you use them. And this Mars Cazimi, in my opinion, is a very potent time and a very potent opportunity to make incredibly deep changes. And I want you guys to utilize that as much as you can. Also, it's hard for me to say utilize with a straight face because I've watched Idiocracy a few times over the past couple months. And if you watch Idiocracy, you know why utilize is funny. Anyway, as the moon goes into Virgo, and it's this waning moon, right? We're getting organized and we're getting ready for both the new moon in Scorpio and this Mars Cazimi. What I think with those two things happening is like, all right, if we're getting ready for like a really deep-seated change, a really big shift in terms of the Scorpio stuff, right? Like where are our roots buried? Where are we digging our fingers into the ground? And what are we like really attaching onto? The moon going into Virgo is, again, being more organized, being more detailed oriented, but it will make that opposition to Saturn. And so there is sort of a tension where it's like, okay, are you doing the right thing? Are you aware of everything that needs to be done? The difference now is Saturn is direct. The reason I titled last week's horoscope is like, you know what you must do, you know what you need to do now is with Saturn stationing direct, it's at the same degree that it hit in March of this year. When we got to March and Saturn ingressed into Pisces for the first time in like 30 years, there was a new sense of responsibility and maturity and what, virtue and, time and where we have to, again, be disciplined changed. The context of that changed. From March to June, we were being introduced to these new changes. And then from June to November, we were slowly being more comfortable and slowly figuring out what that actually looks like. Now that Saturn's direct, we know what we have to do. We know what responsibility looks like. We know what our sense of maturity looks like in terms of Saturn and Pisces, right? We know what we have to do. And that moon going opposite Saturn is a little like, when you just like want to make a big change in your life and you know exactly what you need to do, but like just it can feel overwhelming of all the things that you need to do. It could feel like an impossible task. I feel like that moon in Virgo going opposite Saturn on Monday is like that trigger point of like, oh my gosh, I got to do all these things and it's really scary. But here you are, you're going to do them anyway. And I don't want you to freak out too much about it. Because two things. One, Venus is going to make a trine to Pluto on Monday. The only thing I really want to say about Venus trine Pluto is, yes, Venus has fallen in Virgo. Yeah, it's not really the most fun, but as she's trining Pluto, Pluto, it can be corruption, power, fear. But with it being a trine, we have access to a more harmonious relationship with Pluto. If Pluto is about power and Venus is, again, like fun and pleasure, but she's fallen, it's like, where can we feel empowered by feeling uncomfortable? Like, growth is outside of your comfort zone. And I just feel like with Venus and Virgo trining Pluto is like, it's okay to be uncomfortable. It's okay to not necessarily enjoy maybe the thing that you're doing, but you can feel empowered by the fact that you're doing it anyway. And the other thing is Mercury is going to be making a trine to Neptune. There's a good side and a bad side to this. The bad side is it's going to be really easy to create scenarios and play out fake, fantasies in your head that can make you spiral and kind of just like be doom and gloom about everything. Like it's like, oh, the world's ending, and then if that happens, it's where does it go? And If Neptune is like imagery and illusion and fantasy, Mercury and Scorpio is like really digging into that. And again, that can be bad if you are like just being in a doom moment, but it can be really good for visualization. Like Mercury is about communication, our thoughts, and logic. It's in Scorpio. It's a fixed sign. So it's like this continuous thought process. With it being in Scorpio, it's also like the deeper underlying hidden dark things in life. Like we're kind of fixated on those things. But with it trining Neptune, I think there's this ability to at least have a visualization process and thinking much more deeper about, okay, what is the life that you want to create? What about the situation right now that you don't like that you want to get out of? I've talked a lot about like, clearly it's not bad enough if you're not making the changes for it. And I've also talked about like hate and anger and frustration and how you can use those emotions to get you out of your situation. It's like, I never want to go through this again. I never want to feel this way again. What can I do differently? And I feel like Mercury trining Neptune is like a really good time to use that frustration and that anger to like visualize like, okay, what do I want to create? What does success look like? What does, feeling good and happiness look like for me? And how good does it feel? And how bad do you want it? So Mercury trining Neptune is an excellent time for like attaching imagery to our thoughts and fixating on a specific emotion around it. So then we get to Tuesday, and on Tuesday, the only really thing we've got going on is the moon trining Jupiter pretty much all day long, and then it will make a sextile to Mars basically like at the very, very end of the day at like midnight. Technically, it's like in Wednesday, but we're just going to talk about it on Tuesday. But if the moon's in Virgo making a trine to Jupiter, Jupiter's getting close to stationing direct. We still have another, 2 months for that? But I think we have figured it out at this point of like, Jupiter going into Taurus is, hey, what are your beliefs about this area of your life? What are your beliefs about this area of your chart? What are the opportunities here? Where do you need to grow here? What do you actually understand? And as Jupiter's been retrograde, it's a reflective process of like, okay, if you are not doing the things that you know you need to do, clearly there's a cognitive dissonance there. When I say doing the things that you need to do, if Jupiter and Taurus is like, again, value, consistency. Again, I've been using the term like the slow growth. Jupiter being retrograde is we're still in that internalization process of like really dissecting like our beliefs around this area. It's like you might say like, oh, I believe that, I believe X, Y, and Z in my life, but if you're not taking actions that reflect those beliefs, then maybe you don't actually believe that. And I look at the moon making that trine to Jupiter as at least a connection with, hey, I'm going to do all these moon and Virgo things because I believe in these Jupiter and Taurus things. And again, look at where this is at in your chart. That's how you're going to be able to apply exactly what I'm saying. But the moon in Virgo is being organized, being detailed, getting into the, I don't like saying the nitty gritty, but just being more aware of the details because the devil's in the details. And that moon trining Jupiter is like, okay, I'm going to prioritize these details and these smaller tasks in order to get the most out of, Jupiter and Taurus. It's kind of like, again, if you're planting a garden, there's a certain way that you can plant these or certain plants that you could, plant together for them to all operate in harmony and for them to all be cohesive and work together. It's like, I think I've talked about this before, like the Three Sisters thing that the Native Americans did. It's like, I think it's like corn and then beans and then like squash, like all together, and they kind of like all protect and help each other. That's how I look at the moon in Virgo making a trine to Jupiter. There's a level of like, what do I need to prioritize and what small little details will really help me in the long run? Because it's, again, sometimes you just need a 1% change. Sometimes you just need a little tiny significant shift to really get the biggest results. And after the moon makes that trine to Jupiter, where there is that hope, there is that ambition, there is that like seeing the bigger picture, the moon then is applying to a sextile with Mars in Scorpio. Love that. I love Scorpio energy. I like Scorpio energy because it's just raw and intense and real. Like there's no bullshitting with it. It's like straight to the heart of the situation. It's like straight to the, it's not all fluffy on the surface. It's everything that's deep. And I think as the moon makes a sextile to Mars, it's like all of that is motivating us for what exactly we are putting our energy into. Mars and Scorpio is like concentrated energy. Mars in Aries is so much more of like explosive, charged up, ambitious energy. Mars in Scorpio is like concentrated, fixated energy. It's like blood, like being pulsated through your body. Like it has these specific pathways and the specific job, and it's like the life force of your body. That blood stops pumping, you die. If that blood is not getting to every, little tiny orifice of your body is not going to function correctly. And so but it's slow, right? Blood doesn't just like move super fast. It pumps, but it's consistent, and it goes in and it goes out and it goes in and it goes out. And I just love that moon in Virgo sextiling Mars in Scorpio, where it's just kind of like, it's one of those things where if you are exercising or if you're eating more correctly, you're allowing that blood to flow a lot better. Better blood flow is better for your body, and you will feel better in every single way. And the moon making that sextile to Mars in Scorpio is like kind of like applying that analogy to really anything that you're doing. It's like, what are these tiny little things that you can do to make that blood flow better? And when I say blood flow, what I'm analogizing that as is like, again, like your life. What are you directing your energy into? What are your goals right now? What battles are you fighting? And what can you do to be more efficient in this area, to ensure that what you are doing is going to create the results that you want. And right now, Mars is combust. I really want to recommend a video to you guys. Look up Medieval Astrology Guide. This guy named Ryan Butler, friend of mine, he's a brilliant astrologer. He posted a video about his problem with the term chariot. If you're not familiar with the term chariot is like, for example, when a planet is combust, that means it is very close to the sun, like 10 degrees within the sun. And that means that planet's like not operating correctly. But in like traditional ancient astrology, a planet is in its chariot when it is combust, but in its own zodiac sign. So technically right now, Mars is in its home sign of Scorpio, and the sun is within 10 degrees with it. So it's technically combust, but because it's in Scorpio, its own sign, it's in its chariot. And he has this really... I love people with different opinions in astrology that go against kind of like the norm in the mainstream, and he kind of just dissects it and is just like, that's kind of bullshit. And the reason I bring this up is when a planet is combust, it's not operating all that, well. There's kind of like this level of, for example, it's like when I always think of combustion as when you're driving down the street, and especially like when I lived in Vegas, if you're heading west during sunset, you're just blinded. You can't really even see all that front of you. So you kind of like slow down a little bit, like, because you really can't see. You're concentrating on certain things. You're not fully aware of your peripheral vision because you're so concentrated on one thing. Like combustion is just a planet not operating at its best. It's on fire. It's in a death and decay mode, because a Cazimi is like a planet formally dying and a planet formally, having a birth moment, like having a restart, having a refresh. And right now we're at that like death of Mars and Scorpio stuff. Like, again, what we're concentrated on, what we're focused on is slowly being purged and burned away for us in order to start new. And the reason I just bring this up is with the moon sextiling Mars, it's like we have these concentrated points, but we understand that what we're doing right now is preparing for a new start. This isn't like, hey, we're starting something new and this is what's the focus on. It's like, okay, if we're going to have this new start in Scorpio with the new moon and the Mars Cazimi, this is getting, again, into the details and into the weeds of what exactly it looks like to start new, what exactly it looks like to, again, uproot things. Like, are we going to uproot just one root, or are we going to uproot all of the roots to the tree? So then we get to Wednesday, and on Wednesday, the moon will make a trine to Uranus. It will go opposite Neptune, it will trine Pluto, and it will sextile Mercury. So the moon's actually doing quite a bit on Wednesday. But the big highlight that we have on Wednesday is Venus Venus ingresses into Libra, which is really exciting in my opinion. But let's just cover the moon real quick. The moon, of course, is making all of the aspects to the outer planets. One, the moon will trine Uranus. So again, this is some sort of random event that like is, can create a little bit of innovation or a little bit of instability or doing something that's a little bit like sketchy and it working out. But then the moon will go opposite Neptune, where it's like, have you ever done something where like, I'm going to try something different, and then it works, but you're like, I have no idea how that worked. That's how I think of the moon in Virgo making a trine to Uranus going opposite Neptune. It's like, let me try this real quick. Oh, it worked. And you're like, I don't even know why it's working. Like I do that with music production all the time. It's like, let me try this or that. And then all of a sudden it sounds better, or all of a sudden it sounds different. I'm like, I don't really know what this is doing, but it's cool. So we're going to stick with it. Like, you don't have to read into it all that much. Then the moon trines Pluto. So again, there's a little bit more of that empowerment feeling, but then the moon sextiles Mercury, where it's like one of those things where the more that you check off of your list, the more that you can concentrate your energy on specific priorities. Like if you've got all of these things on your list to do and you can feel overwhelmed, it's like you just need to check off one thing at a time. Do the things that you can get done as quick as possible, that are as easy as possible, to where you can let the rest of your mind be occupied with the things that, take a little bit more time, that take a little bit more concentration. And I think as the moon sextiles Mercury by the end on Wednesday is just, all right, we've cleared up enough space now to like really focus on things that might take a little bit longer, that require more concentration and focus. But the awesome part about Wednesday is Venus ingresses into Libra. Let's think about this. Venus has been in Leo since like May, I think, maybe June. So it was in Leo for let's just say, the end of May, June, July, August, September. And then it ingressed into Virgo, its sign of fall. It was retrograde. It went to its sign of fall. So there was this uncomfortability. It is now in its home sign. So Venus, love, romance, connection, pleasure, indulgence, fun, creativity. She is in a sign where she operates the best, and she has access to all of the resources and tools that she needs to do these things. The area of love and connection and fun in your life, depending on, of course, where Libra is at in your chart, is going to become enhanced. And there's something I just think nice about this, because it's like such a big buildup to Venus finally being in her home sign, to finally being enjoyable again. And as Venus goes into Libra now, like the fun and the connection now comes from, again, like balance, fairness, diplomacy, being able to like be eloquent and, charming. So something about Wednesday is like, there's not as much pressure, or there's not as much like ick. There's not as much like, oh, I'm not enjoying this. I think there's a lot more enjoyable energy, and just, it comes with ease. Like Venus in Libra is just natural. It doesn't need to be forced. It just comes as it is. So I'm really excited about Venus in Libra. Although what's interesting about Venus in Libra is by the end of this month, Venus will conjoin the South Node. So there's something bittersweet about this Venus in Libra transit. Like, we are enjoying an area of our lives where the South Node is. And that means that it's not going to last forever, that there is going to be some sort of a change here. And that kind of starts on Wednesday, where it's like, and the analogy I've been using, and I think I talked about this on my Patreon, on my monthly rising sign horoscopes. It's like when you decide you're going to quit a job, because you hate the job, right? Like most people hate their jobs. And you decide you're going to quit, you put in your 2 weeks. And it's like that last 2 weeks, you kind of enjoy it more because you know it's going to end. You enjoy your coworkers more. You kind of like be nostalgic about the situation. And even though you're ready to leave, you're like, yeah, I'm going to get out of here. You just have a different appreciation for it. That's how I see this Venus in Libra transit. But of course, that energy will build up to Venus conjoining the South Node at the end of this month. And so then we get to Thursday, and all we really have on Thursday is the moon ingressing into Libra and conjoining Venus. And now that the moon's out of Virgo, where again, moon in Virgo is much more anxious, the moon going into Libra, if our emotions and it's our body and it's just our day-to-day vibe, it's going into Libra. It's like, all right, we need to bring some balance here. We need to bring some peace, some order. And it's going to conjoin Venus, where I just think this is just naturally allowing yourself to enjoy the situation, naturally allowing yourself to, receive, being open to receiving, being open to pleasure and fun. And that's like the only thing going on Thursday. Like I think Thursday, and again, the moon ingresses into Libra and conjoins Venus kind of like first thing in the morning. I just feel like Thursday is just a nice day, like at least in the morning. Once the moon separates from Venus and it's not really doing anything, then it's just kind of like, whatever. It's like, it's not like it's bad, but it's not like the real good vibe is Thursday morning of just being able to enjoy where you're at, enjoy the people that you're with, enjoy what you're trying to enjoy. Because I feel like Venus in Virgo is like struggling to enjoy what it wants to enjoy. Like it's not really doing it versus, the moon and Venus in Libra. These are the both feminine planets. They're, together in Libra. It's like enjoying the people that you're with, enjoying things being in a sort of a balanced state at this moment. I just think Thursday morning is just a really good vibe, a really good day. And then the rest of the day is kind of just lingering with that. Like the peak of it is in the morning, and the rest of the day just kind of like steady, plateaus with that. Then we get to Friday, and on Friday we have another highlight, and that's Mercury ingresses into Sagittarius, and it will then immediately square Saturn. Okay, there's a lot to talk about here. Mercury, logic, thoughts, rationale, the way that we communicate, is going into Sagittarius. Boy, if it's one thing I know about Mercury and Sag people, you guys can yap. You guys can just talk. I say that with love. we all have our own, bullshit with our, zodiac signs and shit like that. But Mercury is entering detriment. And I talked about this, I don't have the book with me, but I talked about why Mercury and Jupiter don't do well in each other's signs. Mercury is like trying to rationalize things, and it's in the sign of Jupiter, which is like irrational. It's like, a higher concept. It's like, bigger than life kind of stuff. And the problem with Mercury and Sag is we are communicating way too much. Like Mercury in the sign, like the tiny planet in the sign of the big planet is like, there's all these bigger ideas that we're trying to communicate. We can't communicate them efficiently, or we're using bigger words that maybe we don't actually understand the meaning of. And it's very fun. It's very exciting. I think what's nice about Mercury and Sag is like, it's not Mercury and Scorpio where we're just like hyper focused on one area. Like Mercury and Sagittarius is like, oh, like we can kind of see the bigger picture, and maybe we're struggling putting the pieces together, but at least we're seeing the bigger picture. But it will go into its sign of detriment. It's not operating all that well. And Mercury will be in Sag for quite some time because Mercury will retrograde in Capricorn in December, and it will come back into Sagittarius. And it doesn't leave Sagittarius fully until like January. So we've got some time here. It's not going away anytime soon. But right as Mercury enters Sagittarius, it's going to be squaring Saturn, where again, Saturn's direct. Saturn in Pisces is really like, okay, if Sagittarius is, here's point B, here's where I want to go, Saturn in Pisces is like, what do you need to be internally? Where do you need to discipline yourself internally to meet that? I like Saturn in Pisces too for kind of like, not necessarily disconnecting, but having a boundary with like empathy, and having a boundary with not only like just empathy, but sensitivity. Like, we need to have a little bit more control over that. Like something that I've talked to a few people about is just the whole Gaza Palestine stuff. And I've seen like, there's so many people I follow that are like posting daily about, what you can do to help Gaza and the Palestinians. And that's all, fine and dandy, but it's one of those things where it's like, how much of that is taking your emotions? How much of that is taking your energy, where it's like, is that helping you? And I mean, the other part of it is like, you could protest and, make posts all you want and call your politicians. It ain't stopping. It's not going to stop. It's not how any of this works. And while you can feel virtuous doing that, and I think that's fine, I would just call into question of like, how much of that is like taking away your energy, just feeding off of the, the atrocity, like it's almost like fear porn, for example. And I just look at Saturn and Pisces as like, where can we have better boundaries around our sensitivity and our empathy? And again, that's not to say like you shouldn't have empathy or sympathy for, on either side, but there is a level of like maybe having to have a boundary around that in order to like emotionally sustain yourself. And I look at Mercury making a square to Saturn as like, Mercury's in the superior position here. So that means Mercury is in the 10th house from the Saturn square. You can see that on the chart here. And Mercury's kind of in control of the situation. If Mercury is in detriment and in Sagittarius, it's like we're thinking of this much larger than life thing, but Saturn in Pisces is saying like, hey, the reason you're not connecting the dots here, or the reason why it may not make sense, is like you've got to have a more responsible, more mature, more disciplined like way of handling your own internal beliefs. It's like, again, it's easy to say like, oh, I believe X, Y, and Z, but unless you're like really resonating with that frequency, like I'm going to be making a delineation soon about like the whole idea of frequencies, because I've been really on that lately. Mercury squaring Saturn is just like a harsh no. Like, it's a, communication not vibing with authorities. It is a message that is having a block, and it's Mercury and Sag, where it's like, hey, why can't we all just hold hands and saying kumbaya? And Saturn's just like saying like no, but there's no like, with Saturn and Pisces, it's not like a clear answer. Saturn and Pisces is like speaking in like, metaphors, and it reminds me of like if you've ever read the Book of Five Rings, or God, what's that other samurai book? Like the samurai books, or like any sort of like Eastern culture, like wisdom is always like in some metaphor or something like that. And that's how I kind of look at Saturn and Pisces, is like there's truth to these kind of metaphors that are, you could apply to any part of your life. But just Mercury squaring Saturn is, there's a freedom with our mind. Like we're not so fixated on the Scorpio stuff. There's an excitement to it, but with it squaring Saturn, there's just a blockage there where it's not connecting, it's not resonating. There's wires that aren't, tapping into one another. And so this seems like Friday's a weird day because it seems exciting, but then it also seems like it's not going anywhere, or like there's a block there. And so I would really just kind of like really be aware on Friday of what that looks like for you, because it's one of those things where I just think having an awareness on like Friday is a time to tune in and be like, what, like, where is my mindset shifting? And then where is the blockage for that? And where do I need to be more like chiseled with my ideas? Like Mercury and Sag is like, wouldn't it be a great idea if we just gave everyone money? And Saturn and Pisces is like, that's not going to work that way. And rather than thinking like, oh, why don't we just give everybody money and then we're all out of poverty and stuff like that, it's like, let's refine our idea. Let's refine our optimism. I think that's probably the best way to put it, is refining our optimism through a blunt no. Like, you can still be optimistic, you still have grandiose ideas, but it needs to be refined and chiseled through like some disciplinary, like harsh reality. So then we get to Saturday. The moon will then conjoin, and again on Friday the moon's just hanging out in Libra, but once we get to Saturday, the moon will conjoin the south node. It will go into Scorpio and trine Saturn. And then we have one of our bigger highlights of the week, which is the Mars-Uranus opposition. Number one, moon conjoining the south node. It's just knowing that this is going to not be here. Like, you know, the whole thing with the whole like Hamas, Palestine, Israel situation is like, I try to tell people like peace was never an option. Like the north node's in Aries, the south node's in Libra. Like the idea of war is going to be more pronounced for the next year and a half. And it's just mind-blowing that more people didn't see it that way, because sometimes astrology is extremely literal. But I look at the moon conjoining Libra, the moon conjoining the south node in Libra is like understanding that negotiations, and I'm more so applying this into like like your own life, and I'm not really talking about the whole Israel-Palestine thing. I just wanted to bring that up with the nodes. But the moon conjoining the south node in Libra is like, things aren't going to be balanced and fair. And I think of like the Israel situation as a really good like example of like the both sides and, you know, negotiation. It's a fucking shit show. And as much as like we might want that, as much as we might want to pursue that, there's a lot of other forces at play that are going to make sure that doesn't happen, more than likely. And I look at the moon conjoining the south node as rather than having to be in this mindset of like, oh, what's going to be most fair, what's balanced, because the south node's there. It's not energizing. It's not, it's a draining of just trying to balance everything and make sure both parties are in favor. I think just the moon conjoining the south node is like, sometimes things have to be out of balance, and that's like okay. And I'm saying this more in like a personal development way, like in a much more like applying in your life. Like sometimes, you know, if you're like working on a relationship, like sometimes you might have to be more focused on your partner versus other times you and your partner might be very supportive of each other. And then maybe like right now it's just a time to like be more supportive of them, and maybe you don't have the energy for it, but like that's just what this time, like astrology is just giving you the vibe of like the quality of the time, and the quality of the time on the moon conjoining the south node is like, not everything's going to be in balance, and that's okay. Sure, Venus is there, so when it's balanced, it's nice. Like there is a little bit more at play, but the moon conjoining the south node is like emotionally, we can't have everything balanced and in fair order. But then the moon ingresses into Scorpio, where now we're getting serious. This is where I think everything really gets serious, is because the new moon technically happens like Sunday at midnight going into Monday. I'll talk about it actually next week. But the moon going into Scorpio, we're in this dark moon phase now. What do we need to release? Because here's the thing. On Saturday, Mars is going to go opposite Uranus. There is going to be upheaval. This is going to be like pulling up the roots of a tree to get it out of your, you know, so it's not breaking up your driveway anymore. And you are going to like, you know, pull up an electrical wire. You are going to realize there was a root going into your sewage system. What's the word I'm looking for? Septic tank. And now there's a leak in your septic tank. Mars opposite Uranus is like an explosive electrical upheaval that will cause some instability. And it's like the deeper you go, the more you get things shaken up. I mean, an easy way to put it is like the deeper that you go within yourself, the more that you are working on yourself and you realize where your problems come from and why you have these problems anyway, it really shakes up your whole reality and worldview. And that is good. It is needed, but it is hard. And the moon going into Scorpio, making that trine to Saturn, is like, hey, this is good. You need to do this right now, but it's not fun. This is kind of like the breaking point. And the reason I use that term breaking point is like, this is an opportunity for a breakthrough. but you've got to allow yourself to go that deep, and you've got to allow yourself to like be vulnerable and release those things and not resist it. Because like the thing is with Mars opposite Uranus, if you resist it, you're just going to snap. The more that you resist it, like the harder it is, the more it's like you need chi, you need energy to flow out of you. And this day is an excellent day to let that flow out of you. And this is kind of like allowing things to get so deep that they actually cause some instability and that they actually, break up the energy in the room. They break up the energy in you in a way that you can actually redo it. Like, for example, like sometimes I might be getting this wrong, but I'm going to say it anyway. It's like, when people are doing like surgery on certain like bones, like sometimes they have to break the bone in order to like reform it. And that's how I almost look at this. But with the moon going into Scorpio, now we're in this dark moon. It's like all of this right now is like from Saturday, Sunday, Monday is getting really deep, getting really connected with like, all right, what do we no longer want to feel anymore? Pain, resentment, anger, these deep, these emotions that we're stuck with. I think of like addiction. Like I just had a deal. I went outside of my building and there was meth heads literally smoking meth, and I like literally inhaled some of it, and like I felt like shit. And I'm starting to have zero sympathy for the tweakers, but it's one of those things where like my whole fucking family's addicts. I understand what it is, and with addiction, there's so much shame and there's so much guilt that it just feels like it feels like a tar pit that you're just like stuck in. And I think of this moon in Scorpio with Mars in Scorpio, getting ready for this Kazemi, is like we are stuck in this tar. And at what point, or maybe even quicksand is a better analogy, and it's like at what point are we going to let ourselves be relinquished of this? Like we don't have to feel the shame and this guilt and this negativity. But I think when we get into Saturday with the moon ingressing to Scorpio, is like going into that feeling and saying like, I don't like this. I don't like this. This needs to change. Is it bad enough for me to make a change? And I want you guys to fucking feel it, because this Mars Kazemi is an opportunity to get out of the tar pit. It is an opportunity to get out of the quicksand. It is an opportunity to really like burst through the other side with the Scorpio stuff, the deep-seated pain and resentment and the guilt and the shame that we have. But it's like a new moon, then Mars Kazemi, where it's the moon transit here through Scorpio is like getting ourselves emotionally connected with that feeling and like realizing like, hey, we're getting in our own way. Why are we holding on to childhood trauma? Why are we fucking holding on to what happened to us 4 or 5 years ago? Like it's not serving us anymore. We're just holding on to the pain, and it's like we keep picking at a scab and it's not letting itself heal itself. That's how I see Saturday. And Saturday and Sunday and Monday are just, and then, I mean, that really goes all the way, I think, to like Thursday when the Mars Kazemi happens. But I just think this weekend going into Monday is the time to like emotionally prepare ourselves for what the Mars Kazemi will be. Getting more tuned into what do we need to change? What do we not like? I'm personally making a lot of changes. And for me, I'm actually fucking terrified, but I'm also really excited because I'm ready to make some bigger changes that are so necessary that I'm really struggling with. And I'll be able to talk about those one day, but for right now, I'm not going to. But just know I'm fucking doing the thing this weekend. And so then we get to Sunday, and then the moon will go opposite Jupiter, and that's really it. And it's a dark moon. The moon going opposite Jupiter is, again, it's like, hey, like, for example, like if you want to get sober and you're really addicted, like you're an alcoholic or you're on drugs or whatever, moon and Scorpio opposite Jupiter is like your detox is going to suck. It is going to suck, but there's hope at the end of there's light at the end of the tunnel. That moon opposite Jupiter is like there's an opposition with like our uncomfortability and the opportunities ahead, where it's like, if you want to get sober, like that detox, that purge is not going to feel good, and you're going to resist it. And I shouldn't say you're going to resist it. The initial feeling will be resistance. How can you allow yourself this time around to be open to this and saying like, I know it's going to suck. It doesn't really have to, but it is going to feel uncomfortable. Detoxing and getting gunk out of your body feels like shit. I mean, like you can die. Like that's the one thing that I think is crazy about alcohol is, when you're detoxing off alcohol, you can literally die, which is I just think that's crazy. And so there is going to be this uncomfortability to it, but the moon opposite Jupiter is like, you're either going to like resist and say like, no, I don't want to go through that uncomfortable 3 days or 4 days or week or 2 weeks or a month in order to get to the truth. But I would ask you guys to like recognize that that is the process you're going to go through, and that there's and it's not going to be fun, but understand it's like the Jupiter and Taurus stuff. It's like the long run, the end game is so much better if you just go through this. And it's like the hardest step is the first step. It always is the first step. And I just think as the moon goes opposite Jupiter, there's a connection with that. And then it's just the dark moon, where when we get to Monday and we actually have the new moon in Scorpio, this is the day where it's going to be like, okay, I'm ready. I'm ready to surrender to this. I'm ready to let go and purge of this. And really the day where everything kind of starts is Thursday. But that's what I got for you guys this week. Next week, we have the new moon in Scorpio. We have Mercury sextiling Venus, which is really fun. I'm actually really looking forward to Mercury sextiling Venus. We have the Mars Cazimi, which is really the reset, recharge, purification moment. And we have Mars trine Neptune. Kind of exciting in my opinion. So with that being said, I love and appreciate you guys, and I'll be seeing you next week.